We're delighted to be hosting here at the Maxwell School in a Campbell lecture series former U.S. Representative Richard Hanna. Congressman Hanna represented New York's 22nd District. It used to be called the 24th District from 2011 through 2017. And before I say just a few words about Congressman Hanna, first of all, I want to thank Kelly Coleman and the Campbell Institute for the hard work that she does all the time, but also the hard work that she did organizing this particular lecture, and also for the IT group, and in particular, Tom Fazio. Congressman Hanna was known during his time in office for working across party lines and for being somewhat of an iconoclast within his party. This is evidenced by his voting record, among other indicators. He was also the first sitting Republican member of Congress to publicly support Hillary Clinton for president in 2016. So on the basis of all that, he was not invited to join the Freedom Caucus. He's originally from Marcy, New York, and stopped out of college to help support his family when he was young. Then he finished his degree at Reed College and then started what became a very successful construction business in upstate New York. Congress was his first public elected position, and while in Congress, he served on the following committees: Education and the Workforce, Transportation and Infrastructure, Small Business, and the Joint Economic Committee. One thing he was known for, and I think this is particularly neat, was writing up a public explanation of every vote that he took on the floor of the House. And what we'll do here today is have Congressman Hanna speak to us for a bit. At that point, when he's finished, I might or I might not follow up with him with a question or two of my own. And then following that event or non-event, we'll open it up to your questions, because I know a lot of you have questions that you want to ask. And when we do that, I'd like to ask you to please wait for one of the microphones that will be passed around in order to speak, so that you're part of our archive of the event. And then following that, we'll have a reception here at the back in this room. If I could end this very brief introduction a bit more personally, what I'd like to do is I just would like to say to Congressman Hanna, thank you for your creation and your shepherding into law the Civilian Service Recognition Act of 2011. That's something that's important to both of us. For voting against the cuts to NPR, that's important to me. For your willingness to be a guest multiple times on the Campbell Conversations. And probably most importantly, for your willingness to meet with our students here from the Maxwell School on multiple occasions when we take them to Washington. We really appreciated all those things. So it's both a professional and a personal delight for me to welcome Congressman Richard Hanna, former Congressman Richard Hanna, to the Maxwell School.
You don't mind if I don't use this thing, do you?
Do what you like. You're mic'd.
If you can't hear me, well, I guess you can. I want to start by acknowledging someone I didn't know before I did this, Catherine Bettini, who works here at the Maxwell School and teaches here. One of the great things about this job that I've had is you get to meet people, unique people in the world that I would never have met. And Kathy's one of those people. And in the district, I would put her as one of the great privileges, Kathy, of this job, getting to know you and a few other people that you also know that you've introduced me to. I also want to point out Ethan Gilbert. That's kind of a great name, Ethan Gilbert. Sounds like something out of Little House on the Prairie. But it also reminds me of Groucho Marx. You used to say that Peter O'Toole had a double phallic name. You have a name that could go either way, Gilbert, Ethan, or Ethan. And Ethan wrote a lot of those 974 vote explanations on every bill. They all did, and it was a way of being transparent. I remember one day Boehner saying to me, you're doing your opposition's research, and I thought to myself, no, it's just being transparent and explaining what you do. I'll give you a little idea about our background and my background. I'm the only member of the Republican Party who not only said he was going to vote for Hillary Clinton, but I remain the only person and the first person who came out solidly against Donald Trump, and that it is what it is. I've also the only member with a perfect record on women's health care, the LGBT community. I've always been supportive in every imaginable way. I've signed all the amicus briefs to the Supreme Court. I have arguably the best among the worst environmental records, and but I have a good fiscal record, and I'm a strong advocate of the Second Amendment, and I've never signed a single pledge. As far as I know, I may be one of the only guys that's never, when I came in, who can say that. I voted against the government shutdown, which cost the economy $27 billion estimated, and shut down national parks, inconvenienced everybody for 16 days, and I always wondered why we did it, and I've never to this day figured it out, and no one else has either. We did try to reach across the aisle. We worked my first 2 years there, and I didn't know this business. I just decided that everybody should run for Congress once in their life or do something like that, so I did. And I got 25 years, 30 years in the Operating Engineers Union. I'm a construction person, but always had an interest in public policy. I went there thinking, well, this is great, I'll get a lot done, and there's things I'm interested in. But what I realized very quickly was the orthodoxy that binds together the Republican Party and, frankly, the Democratic Party today is so extreme, driven a lot by gerrymandering and the desire to get reelected, that pragmatic middle, those people who went there for the same reason that Thomas Jefferson had in mind, you know, you kind of go as a professor, a doctor, whatever your background is, farmer, labor, you go impart what it is you have to impart, and you leave someday. But as Ethan will attest, there are people there 30, 40 years, and they become institutions, they become high up on the committees, they're very important, they have a lot of authority, it's easy for them to raise money, and as long as you're willing to say what your base wants to hear, it's pretty easy to get reelected. So I had, in my case, we had a very difficult primary because of that, because of where I stood on a lot of issues that didn't suit the 20 or so thousand people who show up in a very low turnout primary. But we also knew that in a general election, we almost couldn't be beat. We had one of the highest polling numbers. I think it was over 60%. At one point, it was a 78% reelect, which is unheard of, which in my district showed me that if you want to govern, you don't necessarily have to govern from the middle. But what I learned is what I've always known in my whole life, for my whole life, is that people don't always care where you are on a particular issue, but everybody likes somebody with character. And it's not a bad thing to disagree with somebody. As a matter of fact, if you disagree with them and they can defend themselves, as we did when we wrote our vote explanations, it adds depth to the person, to the conversation, and it also adds something that people don't talk about very much, and that is they see someone as a leader who's willing to take a chance, and someone with a core value system that's not fungible. One of the problems with government today is people tell you what you want to hear. Why should I take a poll of my base, ask them what they want to know and how they want me to vote, and then turn around and parrot it back to them? But that's what you see today. I've been in the caucus, there are 240-something members in the Republican caucus, and had people stand up and say, yeah, I agree with that, but what is my Tea Party group going to say? They're going to hate me for it. I can't get reelected. Well, you know, so what? That's not what the job description is. You got a job to do. You're a representative. You're a member of Congress, but the underlying title is you represent 200 or 720,000 people. I think it's a rough number, and that requires a lot of broad thinking. And it isn't about you, but a lot of what you see in Congress today is people who there really is a political class in this country. I think there really is such a thing as people who start out in politics, work their way up through the system, wind up in Congress or wherever. and they have no other alternatives in their lives. As a member of Congress, you make $174,000 a year, and you go on Codels. Last year, they worked 95 days. Now, you're supposed to work in the district, and we did. We were busy. But for a lot of people, it's a pretty easy job. If you're in a very safe, well-gerrymandered district and you have good staff, it's a great way to make a living. The health care isn't that expensive, and the pension isn't what people think, but it's there. So of the jobs that I can see a lot of people would like, being a member of Congress is probably at the top of the list. But that's kind of the downside. The upside is there's a lot of opportunity there. I think the biggest disappointment for me was going there every day, realizing how much room there was to work and get things done, and how few people there were willing to move away from their own ideologies to get that work done. In my first 2 years there, we had more bills pass the floor, including the one you mentioned, Grant, than any other member. And I didn't know what I was doing, to tell you the truth. It was just a matter of picking things that looked doable, looked reasonable, and trying to bring people together. I was the co-chair of the STEM caucus. I was the lead on universal pre-K, a subject matter I fell in love with. I worked with Arnie Duncan on a bill called the Strong Start for Children Act, but it went nowhere because, frankly, the Republican Party and the majority is not deeply engaged in education. I don't know how else to say that, but if you look at something like pre-K, it is that thing that we could spend money on that really has a singular opportunity to break the back of intergenerational poverty. And there's a lot to talk. The payback is enormous. But I'd rather be asked questions and answer than be more. I think it's more helpful. So, Grant, if you have a question, I'd be happy to.
I've got a couple, yeah. The first one is, you predicted a little while ago, rightly, that the effort to repeal Obamacare was going to crash.
Yeah, it wasn't hard to figure that out.
So, but it took some folks by surprise, at least that nothing came out of it. And so, thanks, Tom. So, my question, I guess, for you is, what do you think is likely now? I mean, what will the future hold here, both near term and long term? There's some noise already for taking some smaller cracks at this. How do you see that playing out?
Well, what people don't realize about Washington is, and how you vote, it's a numbers game. The majority controls the agenda, and the Republicans are in have one of the biggest majorities in history, as they did last time. And if you have a group on either side that consolidates and decides to vote against you, it only takes right now, I think, 27 votes to kill a bill. So the Freedom Caucus has many more members than that. They vote en masse. They agree. My understanding is, I could be wrong, but as long as 80% of them agree, 100% of them vote that way. So Paul Ryan can put out something that's reasonable, maintains the promise that they make, which is that they won't affect pre-existing conditions, that people up to 26 can stay on their parents' health insurance, and that 20 million people won't be kicked off of what they've gotten in the last 6-7 years. He can declare that so, but if a group of people don't like that, don't want that, and clearly there's a group that doesn't, at least parts of that, they can shut him down. So that wasn't hard to see. It's frankly pretty predictable when you listen to the demagoguery that comes out of some of the extremes. And I'll say, as a criticism, that the ideology takes precedent over the facts. Facts and that kind of internal discussion of what's best and how can we get this done really isn't enough. That doesn't go on often or seriously enough. These are a group of people who say, and a lot of them are friends of mine, and I have voted with them a few times on some things, but they will say to you, and I'm often embarrassed to hear it, I promised my people, my base, I was going to vote against this, and I was going to. So they want that vote. They want to be able to go back and say they voted to get rid of Obamacare. And to be honest, I did too. I mean, I voted against it, not as many times as other people, because whenever they associated it with Planned Parenthood or something, which they did often, I wouldn't vote for it, and I voted no. But the idea was they always had a plan to come up with something that was less expensive, that fixed some of the problems with Obamacare that everybody admits to. But clearly, that was not there. What happens going forward is, my guess is that they find a way to satisfy the Freedom Caucus. They have enough votes to get it to the Senate. They can declare victory, and that the Senate will reject it, but drag that out for a long, long time while they do other things, just so they can say that they actually got it out of the House. I don't know, you see it any differently, Ethan?
I don't know what'll happen. That's as good a guess as any.
Yeah, well, there you go. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think at some point it'll pass the House. They know that they set these priorities out. They made these promises. They're trying to find anything they can to satisfy the Freedom Caucus. But by the time they do that, there's not enough people. You've got Markowski and Collins, and there are some solid people in the Senate who just aren't going to go along with this. And as you see today, Mitch McConnell is going to, they're going to go nuclear on the 60 vote issue and put it back to 50, or go to 50, which is, I think, never happened. 211 years, I'm not sure of that, but hopefully they don't keep doing that. But you're going to see something go to the Senate that the Senate will just reject out of hand.
Let me ask a second question that is going to attempt to complicate, I think, a little bit of some of the things that you said so far about the extremes versus finding a place in the middle. And this question is a collective question from both me and Scott Barrett. So there's two of us behind this. But political scientists looking at voting behavior are pretty clear in telling us that party association is as strong as it ever has been in driving citizens' votes. That's one of the explanations for why Trump won. That's why, in the view of many, this was a surprising victory. In the view of most, one of the explanations for that is the enduring power of party association as a driver of votes. At the same time, it also seems like the popularity of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump at the same time suggests there's something important going on that for voters that neither party is providing them, and it's not clear, thinking of those two figures, that it's some sort of moderate middle that they're yearning for. I mean, how do you explain that puzzle?
I mean, that dynamic, those two severe forces at the same time? A bunch of different ways. There's a lot to look at. I have never criticized people who supported Trump. If you're happy with this government, you must be from another country, because there's a lot to be unhappy about. If you look at what people's retirement right now, there are very few people in this country who expected that their children would actually live less well than they are. But about a third of the population right now, the children growing up, that's happening to. This country's promise has always been, basically and understood, that the future would be better for the next generation. That's not happening. And white males are dying at an accelerated rate. Actually, the numbers are getting worse. You know, drug abuse, unemployment, divorces, alcoholism, these unfunded, endless wars that people come back through from PSTD and everything associated with it. People have a lot of reasons to be unhappy. And you look at a guy like Bernie Sanders, I mean, he's a socialist. And whatever that means to different people, well, he says he's a democratic socialist. I actually sit on a committee with him and Ted Cruz at the same time, the Joint Economic Committee. You have people who believe that, and I don't like the way they frame this. I've never been a big fan of Bernie, but I do get what he says, and that people have a deep sense of unfairness throughout our economy, that there are the super rich people who seem to somehow, we've decided that somehow that's wrong. He's divided people up into victims and perpetrators, as opposed to people who worked hard and got successful, and other in the Republican Party would say that the other side didn't put the effort in it, didn't educate themselves, didn't prepare. But in the last 20 or 30 years, our economy has changed in ways that it never has before. Those big industrial jobs that used to be guarantees that people could go to, and like GE that was here, or Remington Arms and Ilion, you could go, you could have your father's job and have it as long as he did. That isn't the way anymore. Education and what you're doing here today is key to success. And we live in a global economy. I was a supporter of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, one of the few. But I can tell you everybody behind the scenes supported it. But it became unpopular to talk about. Hillary, who was in favor of it, came out against it. A lot of people did, because it was a demagoguery of blaming someone for something. So you blame China, you blame government, you blame any number of things, but you never blame yourself. And what I saw in my office, and Ethan can attest this, every 15, 20 minutes, people file through. There's 1,000 programs, there used to be hundreds. But now everything is critical, whether it's Meals on Wheels or Head Start, or pick a subject, some rare disease. The world will end if you stop funding for that. Everybody's got a lobbyist. And for a long time in this country, we were growing. And it was only 16 years ago, we almost had a balanced budget. But because of our aging economy and our slowing economy and our loss of growth and the competitiveness around the world, we're growing at a rate that can't sustain our expenses. So for the first time, government and people with my job are, if they're responsible, they're just saying, no, we can't do that. We don't have the money to do that. They don't talk about the big issues. They don't say the problem is healthcare and how we provide it. They don't say that, you know, we can fix Social Security with minor changes to it, because those are the, when the President Obama mentioned a thing called chained CPI, which is simple change in the way they keep track of Social Security and how they pay it out. It would cost every recipient $4 or $5 a month. My phone not only lit up, but we got 6,000 letters from AARP members in this district. And you know, it's an immovable force that guarantees that you would never be elected if you tried to push something like that. So, you know, that's not a path that anybody's going to go down. And yet, that's exactly what they're paid to do, to sit down, go back to the district, and say, you're living off of your children and your grandchildren's future. Is that really what you want to do? Or are you willing to sacrifice $4 or $5 a month to save Social Security for them, which for the first time in our history, in 2010, we actually paid out more than we took in. And by not too many years in the future, and the number moves, it'll actually be a net outlay constantly and go broke. And eventually people will wind up either paying more money in or cutting the benefits by 25, 30% or more. But people don't want to hear that. And we've got a screwed up provider system for, we have the most expensive healthcare in the world. It's double most other developed countries, yet we're not dealing with that. Nobody wants to talk about a single payer. And yet the insurance companies take a big piece off the top. You know, there are ways to do this. People don't know how to shop for their own health care. You can go to an MRI and get one for $300, or you can go to your basic hospital and nobody knows. You hand them your insurance card and it's $1,700 for the same thing. It's crazy. People don't know how to shop for their own health care. And yet Obamacare raised the deductibles for a lot of middle-class people in ways that they weren't prepared for. Their insurance costs went up, and now there's insurance companies that that don't cover a great many states. They're only down to one provider. That gives them great leverage to raise prices. And I know there's some controls in that, but you know, there are ways to fix our problems, but it requires leadership that we don't have. And when you get a president who stands out there and says, everybody's going to have insurance, we're going to keep everybody who's on Obamacare on it, and it's going to be, you know, pre-existing conditions and all the other things, you're being lied to, because you can't have it all. And then when you combine that with the fact you have a Congress on the Republican side and the majority who are not willing to raise any taxes anywhere on anything, that's the definition of never getting anything done.
So this will be the last question I ask you before we turn it over to the audience, but this is going to give you another swing at a question I asked you a little bit earlier on the program. You have talked earlier about the problems that you confronted in Congress and some of the deep dysfunctions that you saw there. I wanted to ask you, let's say you could do those 6 years over again. What's the one most important thing that you think you might do differently, knowing what you know now, if you could rewind the clock?
I would have, I told you earlier, it was like being in Congress is like listening to Leonard Cohen music. It's depressing and interesting at the same time.
And I happen to be familiar with that, so
Right.
I appreciate the analogy.
I would have spoken up more. I spoke up with my votes. I got a lot of criticism for them. And incidentally, I'm still the only person who, on the Republican Party, who came out not only against Trump, which hit your Syracuse paper, and we had how many thousands of phone calls and emails, tens and tens of thousands, most of it really ugly hate mail, a lot of it from in the middle of the night with things that we would rush to the phone in the morning because it was so fun to listen to, and often very vulgar. And you experienced it, right, Ethan? Oh, yeah. But it wasn't what I wanted to do. I mean, I prayed for a different candidate, and after I did that, I hoped that Mr. Trump would be different somehow. That hasn't proven out. So I'm comfortable with it. One of the things about this job, to your point, if you're a member of Congress, you're paid more attention to than your intellect, ability, or background should, by any other means, give you that kind of deferential voice for. These are just average folks. Some of them are wonderful, a lot of good people there. But I looked at that and I said, I got 2 young kids, got married late in life, and I felt very strongly about it. And I thought, and this is very selfish of me, but I thought, how do I explain being quiet about Trump to my kids 10 years or 5 years from now, whenever they're thoughtful about this? And what's wrong with objecting to a person, regardless of whether they're president or nobody? Not only, I felt I had a voice that I couldn't subdue and an opportunity in time that I couldn't push away or change. And when he came out against that family who lost their son, and any number of other things, John McCain insulting him, and then just the general vulgarity of the whole, I just thought, I can't sit here any longer. And I wrote that on a Sunday night, sent it to Mark Wiener, your local guy, and they printed it, and all hell broke loose. We had 16 people answering the phone for 3 days. It never stopped. But I never felt bad about it. I felt bad that I was being so severely criticized when I was confident that I did what I thought was right. But I also felt as though I couldn't escape that obligation. It wasn't really what I wanted to do, but it's what I needed to do internally, because I couldn't pass that up and explain it away later on. So, I own it. I'm happy with it. I hope that I wouldn't be happy with it, but I feel vindicated when I watch what goes on a daily basis. And I can tell you this, a lot of guys in Congress and women came out and they said they're going to vote for Johnson. Is that the guy's name? Gary. So, yeah, Gary Johnson. They weren't voting for Gary Johnson. They just didn't want to say they were voting for Hillary. They didn't want Trump, but they couldn't publicly say they were against him because it was such an unpopular and frankly suicidal thing to do. So they would say, okay, I don't like Trump, but I'll vote for Johnson. Well, why not just throw your vote down the drain? Because voting for Johnson was an utter waste of time. And we saw that. And it's no different than the Al Gore election. And incidentally, you said earlier, he won the election. We're the only country in the world where a guy like him would have won because the popular vote was 2.85 million in the other direction. So we have the Electoral College, which incidentally Trump hated until he won by it, the president. And, I think that's kind of an anathema to democracy based on how it was originally thought of. And, but here we are. And I think that if people like Trump, that's great. I certainly know a lot of people who feel disenfranchised or unhappy with the circumstances. They had expectations that aren't being met. They see a government that's largely dysfunctional and doesn't get its work done. And he was a vehicle for that anger and frustration. And they deserve that vehicle. What they deserve more so is a better candidate, a guy who spoke to those issues in a way that I think was thoughtful, knowledgeable, and frankly, I was raised by a Marine who was strict, required good manners, good, and civility, and I don't see that, and that personally bothers me. I want a guy that my kids can look up to and say, I want to be that guy someday. He's not that guy for my kids. Anybody have any questions? Yes?
We've got microphones going around. You're nearest.
Thank you very much for being here, and I'm happy to have the first question because I'm not going to ask you about a specific issue because lots of other people are going to do that. So talk a minute about the nuts and bolts of being a congressman. How big was your staff? Great people like you mentioned, Ethan, and how many of them came from the district? What kind of things would they do on a day-to-day basis?
It was easy. That's an easy one. We had 16 people, and there's a cap on the staff. I think it's 18, including me. So we had that.
And I was going to ask you lastly, is there one citizen service that you did, that we never hear about in the paper, but you really remember and you like to pat yourself on the back for a great job you did for somebody in the district?
Let me tell you about this job. If you do it right, you can be happy with it every day if you don't do anything other than fix individual problems. In the 6 years we did this, and I won't take credit for it, I'll give it to the staff, but we had a standard. Everybody gets called back in 48 hours, right? So it was 100%. And if that's broken, we figure out why and we do it. We fix it. We write as many non-specific or as many specific non-generic emails as possible. And if somebody has an IRS, Veterans, Social Security, immigration issue, that's priority over everything else. So everything filtered down to the individual. We had a woman who had a case with the Social Security that was going way back to Sherry Bollard. And she thought they owed her $22,000. To your point, they did. But what I did, I kept a list of all the people that I needed to deal with from Veterans, IRS, Social Security, and I would call them, and I'd say, this is Congressman Hanna. And the first thing they want to do when they hear that is get rid of you, which is smart of them, right? So we said, this lady thinks that, would you look into it? And a week later, she got her money. And it's the same with veterans. This job is not, it's nuts and bolts, is making those phone calls and helping somebody one person at a time. And if you can do that and have your staff do it, and they did 99% of it, but I was able to interject and set a standard, you can be happy. It's the greatest job in the world if you want to do that. And I always kind of fell back on that. When you go to the lousy apartment that you're paying $2,000 a month for, and a lot of people go out and they drink and they carouse and they have a good time. I don't think I went out 3 times. I go home and I read, and I missed my family. So, but I knew that was my problem. But I could always take solace in that. I could always, veterans issues. The veterans, the local Veterans Administration here, incidentally, I can't say enough good about. As much as St. Louis and all the problems you heard, that's not an issue in this community. They do a great job. The clinic in Rome, the hospital here in Syracuse, and the clinic in Binghamton, they do great work. And they worked well with us. We could call up and ask a favor. They'd bend the rules a little bit to get somebody in or whatever. So that was good. And just generally having town hall meetings. I had 74. The guy who I beat to get this job, a nice man, a friend of mine, Mike Arcuri, had very few of them. But, and I'm upset, frankly, that Claudia Tenney, the person who took my job, to be blunt, has decided not to do that. You know, when I had a telephone town hall meeting, those are interesting, but you know what you do? You can filter the questions. You can ask somebody what they want to know, and they're your friend, and you put them on the air, and that's not what it should be. And the reason we wrote all those vote explanations was because we could kind of cut people off at the pass. They would call us up screaming, and we'd say, well, do me a favor and go back and read this, and then call us if you're still mad or if you change your opinion or whatever, and it kind of worked. We didn't have a lot of problems, but yet I had the strangest record in the Republican Party, you know, by their terms, not by mine.
We'll get Eric, and then this one, you had a question, we'll come up here to you. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So I have two questions that are related to healthcare. One of them is a state level issue, and one of them is kind of implicit in the answer that you gave in response to Grant's question about the Affordable Care Act and repeal efforts. So the first one is, you said that nobody is wanting to talk about healthcare or about single payer here in New York, so this is a state level question. The New York Health Act has a lot of momentum behind it right now, and I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about that at state level payer, single payer. And then the second question is, in your answer, you referenced the ability, like people don't have the knowledge to shop for their own healthcare. And I'm wondering if that's an incorrect frame, because when you're applying this market-based logic to something that is so often a deeply emotional issue and something where the amount of pressure that's facing you in the terms of decision-making and the stakes of it, it's not always possible to shop.
But other countries do it well. And what I said was not that people don't have the knowledge, they don't have the incentive to do it. You know, the market incentives, if you don't know what something costs and you're given a credit card that you punch in and you get back the bill, but it doesn't come to you, that changes the dynamic. I mean, I do that. I go to Bassett, I don't have any idea what it costs, but I would like to know. I'd like to know that I could participate in the cost end as well as the medical end of it. So I think other countries are doing a better job than us on providing health care for half the cost. That's a known fact. And it's the same with a lot of things. Education is another one. But I don't have a good answer. I can tell you one thing that's fraudulent about the bill that the Republican, I say fraud, that might be a rough word, but I'll take it. To say that you're not going to, that in this bill, New York State makes the counties pay for Medicaid, right? And to change that in a bill and use that as an excuse to support this bill is not right. Because in 4 years, that same bill cuts Medicaid in half. And it doesn't necessarily change the dynamics of the cost for the state. So members on the Republican side went down that road as a way to explain away their vote for the health care bill, but it's a terrible bill for New York. And one of the reasons a lot of things won't happen, like they want to eliminate the deductibility of interest on your home and things like that, and different other expenses. If you look at the numbers, New York's got 27 members right now, and it used to have 45. And California has a lot. Those are enough states right there to block almost anything from happening on certain things. So I don't have a good answer for you on single payer. I don't know enough about it. I have begun to believe more in it because I've taken the time to read about, since I got out of Congress, I've taken the time to read about how it's handled in other countries.
I have two questions. When you mentioned the carousing, is some of that at lobbyist events? My first question. And second question, what do you think of leaving behind the two-party system and maybe moving on to something more like the parliamentary system they have in Europe?
No, we have a broken two-party system, but there's nothing wrong with a two-party system. The problem is fundamentally the way the candidates are picked now. There are districts that are so secure that you can't lose as long as you pander to that person. You don't let somebody get to the right of you or the left of you, on both spectrums. That there used to be about 140 swing districts in this country. You're lucky if you live here in Onondaga County, you live in one of them. The Utica area is where my district is a little safer for a Republican. And this is one of the few places, I think, in the state where Trump didn't carry this district, right? He overwhelmed in my district. But we need more of an incentive for these people to go to Congress and be more broadly representative. And what has happened in the 2010 year that I went in, there were so many people from the ultra-right with the Tea Party movement that they're true believers. And they're not out there trying to change their tune. They're trying to rebuild the world in their image. They're not interested in pluralism and tolerance and kind of just reaching solutions, and you can see that every day. By and large, they're interested in getting their notion of the world recreated, which devolves a lot back to the states, from education to transportation, and now healthcare, right? What'll that do? That'll pit New York against every other state. So, take that for what it's worth, but that's what I saw. We really need to fix our election process. And you also see people talk about being independent, but a guy named Babinek ran as an independent, spent a couple $1 million in my district, got, 14-15% of the vote. And, Claudia didn't win by a majority, but Kim Myers spent a few $1 million. Elections are a lot about sentiment too. And I would say sometimes more sentiment than anything else, how people feel in the moment. And people were mad, and President Trump gave him that outlet. And I think you may see a reversal of that if he doesn't start, I think, managing this job in a much, much less chaotic fashion.
Hi, Congressman Hanna. First, I want to say that I'm a moderate Republican from Utica, so thank you for your service to my district. I really appreciate it, and also for your leadership against Trump. And so I have two questions. First, would you have ran again if you didn't have such a strong primary challenger in Claudia Tenney? And two, do you regret leaving Congress? Because on one hand, I think you set a really strong example of what congressmen should be, being you go for a few years and then you leave. But on the other hand, now my district is represented by a much more conservative Republican. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I think your assumption is right, that had I gone into a primary with her this time, there's a better chance that I would have lost. But when we polled, as I said, we had one of the best polls in the country. We had better than a 60% approval rating, hard reelect, and a 78 or something general approval rating. In a general election, we're good to go, right? But the more pointed to your question, your more pointed question is, would I have done it if I were going to run again? I would have, and I probably would have lost. But that's the price of life, right? I mean, and I can say that. I'll give myself no credit for this. I'm well off. That's kind of out there. So I don't need a job. My family's secure, I'm secure. And so I'm in an easy place to say that. But on my own behalf, I will say that I would have done it anyway. Because I couldn't, it's just like the LGBT community. I supported them my whole life. Why would I go there? And I've been a supporter of Planned Parenthood my whole life, precisely because I want to reduce abortions to zero, and nothing else. And if you look at blue states where there is good coverage for contraception and that whole gambit of women's health care, what you see now is that abortions that are at the lowest rate in our history, and in particular in those states. So it's completely disingenuous for the Republican Party to claim, I believe that they believe what they're saying because they're against abortion. And a lot of that's driven by the Christian element, the hard Christian element in the party, and there's a lot of that, and I'm not criticizing their beliefs personally, but I do think there's a point at which you leave that at the door, and you recognize that tolerance and pluralism, as I've said, matter, and that a woman's choice on that very difficult decision, and there are limits in New York to the age and a lot of other things, it's handled. And that being willing to shut down the entire government over that issue was important to people, and they tried to do it many times. So I probably would have lost a primary, but I had the independence endorsement, and I was thinking, maybe I'll run as an independent. I know the Republicans, I couldn't make that base happy, and but the reality is, believe it or not, I got a 9.5, almost 10-year-old boy, and an 8-year-old daughter, and I missed them, and I felt like they're drifting away from me, and that was more important to me. And I thought, if he's 12, he won't want to know me. So I got him by the throat for a couple of years, and I didn't want to miss that. So I could not be happier. I will say, though, if I were there now, I would be much more vocal than I was. I was reluctant to be a bomb thrower, as much as I objected, but I didn't want to go out on the floor, and I didn't want to be a pariah, because I believe in a lot of what they do, and I like these people personally. And to go out on the floor and ask, and I'd have to ask Nancy Pelosi for time to speak on her side, which she would give me, and Steny Hoyer, either one. And I didn't want to do that, but I think if I were there now, I would do that, because I feel like the example set by Trump is so profoundly bad in so many ways. But read the LA Times.
Yes.
Thanks.
Great. Hi, my name is Walt Doddard over here. I'm an MPA candidate here at Maxwell School. I want to thank you for taking the time. My question is regarding some of the things we've heard today about congressmen should serve for a few years, a few terms, and then get out. And that turnover would be overall a good thing for the legislature. I just want to articulate a counterpoint to that and have you respond to it. You had alluded to earlier that when you came in, it was a new experience. You had to learn how to legislate. I think our current Congress has to learn how to legislate as well. They've spent the past 8 years as an obstructionist force, and now they have to learn how to do that as well. One of the impacts of that is that those people who are in the conversation or in the room that do know how the process works and know how to move things forward are lobbyists and special interests. So the counterpoint would be to term limits or shortened terms would be that people with power would be unelected officials. They would be the people in Washington.
Yeah.
So just if you could respond to that counterpoint.
There's term limits and there's term limits. I think for the Senate, if I had to pick out of a hat, I'd say 18 years, 3 terms. And in the House, you're right, it takes a few years to get up to speed, to get comfortable, to be an expert. A lot of people go to Congress and they're interested in 1,000 things. I focused on 3 or 4, and I like to think I became, in some ways, the go-to guy for some of that. And that was my goal. And I think that takes time. So I would say in the House, 12, 14 years works. But I think the risk of having career politicians far outweighs the risk that you pointed out. Lobbyists are always going to be there. And one of the things that's bad, really bad, is the Citizens United. It killed our democracy. It's an anathema to everything that makes us work, because big money comes into this district, and if they like John Katko or they don't like him, you're one vote, one guy, $1. They're one guy in Las Vegas with millions of dollars, or wherever he might be from, or New York City. That's not right. And then you don't even know where that money came from. And you got groups like Heritage Foundation they'll call up members and say, and I got these calls, you would know, they would score things, right? So what is a score? They would say, we're going to score this bill. that's not just an implicit threat. That's a threat. There's nothing implicit about it. If you vote against this, that's a mark against your record, and they're going to look at that and they're going to say, how severe was that? And they all do that, from the Chamber of Commerce, who widely supported me, to the Club for Growth, to Heritage. And so our democracy is being parsed out to a lot of these big money groups, and you pointed that out. We need to undo Citizens United. I think that decision was terrible. And we also need to be able to understand whose money is involved in our elections, and we don't have that ability either. And I benefited from that. I mean, a group in New York City, a gay rights group, spent $400,000 on my campaign because they didn't want me to lose, because I stood up for them, and it was important that they could show that this guy isn't a loser because he supported us, right? And I was the only guy in the United States that the United Teachers Association supported, the National Teachers Association supported. I was the only guy in the United States that Planned Parenthood went door to door for. Republican guy, thanks. Well, I thought that's obvious. So, you know, it's not one-sided. Everybody's got a lobbyist, Democrats, Republicans, and money flows. It's interesting to me that there's limits on the amount of money you and I can kick in, $2,700, but there's unlimited money for other groups. I find that strange.
Congressman, concerning today's lack of civility, lack of collegiality among elected officials in general and congressional members in particular, how can that end? And my other question is, are you running for governor of New York?
It isn't going to end because the demagoguery isn't ending, and the divide is only getting wider, not narrower. And you see that today with Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell doing something that I know he doesn't really want to do, take this nuclear option. And things got really bad today. We'll see how that plays out. But Chuck Schumer may have overplayed his hand. You just don't know. I don't see it getting any better. As a matter of fact, you got a president who seems to be more than happy to make it worse. It's one thing to have a discussion with somebody over an issue. It's quite another matter to insult them personally, physically, with gay abandon. How is that helpful? So I wrote a piece recently about the elimination of shame by this president, that when I grew up, if you were a bigot, a racist, a homophobic person, whatever your predispositions were, there's a certain element of shame that kept it subdued and didn't give you license to talk about it, or at least if you felt that way, you knew somehow it was wrong and you would kind of keep it to yourself. Well, this guy, this president, be respectful, has given license to people to be the way they want to be on a very visceral and gut level, and I think it's degrading our ability to have true civil discourse and discussion when you go to the bottom right away like that. And you allow insults and all of that to be a standard. You change societies, and the people who support Trump, there are a lot of people like that. But there are a lot of people that disagree with him who still support him because they're so deeply invested in the change that they hope for. But we're in trouble in Syria today. You can see that. We've energized North Korea, and we are engaging ourselves in wars all over the world. They want to spend another $54 billion on defense, but your Great Lakes are going to lose what it takes to keep them clean. We're going to lose NPR, according to Mick Mulvaney's budget, the budget director, and any number of other things, Meals on Wheels, pick a subject. Everything's social and good that allows us to kind of move our conscience through society in a way that helps people, and I think should also always demand personal responsibility from them. And every program, for the most part, should have a way out of it for people, except those that really need it for the rest of their lives or whatever. We've changed that. And it bothers me a lot because I tell you what hit me recently, and I don't want to, I heard a member of Congress say the other day that old people should pay their share of their health insurance and young people should only pay what it costs for them. I couldn't agree with that less. Those young people will be old someday. And those people that are younger than them will help them. Because there's very few of us of any age that could afford what it costs for any particular bad disease. So that social compact, that agreement for all of us to kind of kick in so that we can all have health care, makes good sense to me. And I find that kind of, I guess what I'm saying is, to be succinct, I don't want my morality to be relegated to everything that is Darwinian. And that's the way it feels sometimes, you know?
This will be our last question here, and then we'll continue our conversation with the reception. Go ahead.
So you said that you favor term limits. I would argue that if elections are free and fair, we don't need term limits. When elections are free and fair, elections serve the purpose that term limits would serve. And you've talked about a couple of things that interfere with free and fair elections. You said Citizens United needs to be overturned. That's one of them. I agree with you. You mentioned gerrymandering a couple of times, which is another thing that interferes with free and fair elections. Something you didn't talk about at all is voter suppression. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what, if anything, you did or what your experiences related to gerrymandering and voter suppression were while you were in Congress, and what you think Congress can and should be doing to deal with those issues.
First of all, I understand what you're saying. If everything else were equal, I think we wouldn't need term limits. You'd be right. But we don't have free and fair elections. We have big money coming in from the outside for particular candidates to support particular issues. It's not balanced. It's not out of your community or your needs. And I don't know of another way to address it than term limits. And that's not going to happen. It's like, you know, asking the fox to guard the chicken house. So it's not a practical thing. It's just a talking point. And you'll get every member of Congress to tell you they're in favor of term limits, but you never get them all to vote at the same time on it, right? So, and what you realize is that, as I said earlier, and I have worked on that. Walter Jones and I have a committee. There's only two of us. I think, is there three of us? I'm not sure. Yeah, we started a group that addressed that very issue, and we put a couple of bills out. But you have to realize, some things you do are just become a waste of energy. You do it because you feel morally obligated and you want to speak out. But almost always you know that if leadership isn't going to pick it up or engaged in it, or the general group on your side, your caucus doesn't agree with it, you're going nowhere. And the thing I think that bothered me most about being in Congress was the lack of intellectual rigor. I don't mean to be snobby about it, but you know, the idea that you kind of sit down and you look at the block of issues and you say, well, here's, you know, because everybody hates Obamacare writ large. Well, it's not bad writ large. It isn't the worst thing that ever happened. It's got real problems, and fundamentally, they didn't address the cost issue when it was done, and it's done a lot of things that a lot of people predicted. But in the 60s, sometimes they voted against it. Nothing was directed at, there were a couple, but almost nothing was directed at addressing the problems that people said they didn't like about it. So that was also a problem. You know, when an ideology takes precedent over reality and facts and people's needs and an opportunity to fix something, you're kind of lost from day one, you know, from go.
So I want to do a couple things by way of conclusion. First, did you answer that question about the governor? I don't know.
Oh, governor, yeah. Well, I will. I don't know. It's
Did he answer? No.
No.
You will answer it or you will run?
No, I'm not. I'll answer it. This is what. First of all, the reason I got calls from downstate, and wealthy people look at my record and they'll say he's great on social issues, great in the environment, got a good fiscal record, and I do believe in background checks. I've always said that, but I'm a good supporter of the Second Amendment and been endorsed by the NRA. So if you add those things up, you'd say there's a guy who ought to run for governor. I think Carl Palladino is a despicable human being. And I mean, if you need proof, just keep me going. But okay, he was the Republican candidate. They get 25% of the vote if they don't even show up. And that's what they get, right? So the point is, the Republican Party in New York, not other places so much, has become, in my mind, incapable of nominating someone who's broadly electable because they refuse to acknowledge that New York State and the National Party are not the same in terms of the demographics. And so you get downstate and upstate, and I think that Cuomo, frankly, has a good opportunity to win. I think there's going to be a lot of backlash over Trump, but the Republican Party supported Trump deeply. Ed Cox, someone I know and like, supported him, and the party supported him, and they would never support me. If what happens is, by the time you pass the litmus check the box test for the conservative party, which apparently is the Republican Party has relegated its brain to and its ideology to, by the time they've done that, I think they've made themselves unelectable in New York. And for those people who call me and say, why don't you run? I'm not going to do that because I know that I can't get the nomination. I would like to do that, but it's not something I think is practical. And it would be nice to have a job where you can actually affect change. But I'm not going to do that because I know better. I'm just not spinning my wheels. And I don't want to run the state be insulted by every party chair that meets me. You know, I've already had that happen enough. So there you go.
So final thing I want to do before I thank you is just to say I think I know you well enough to tease you just a little bit. What I want to say is, when you come back next time, we'd really like you to tell us what you really think. But I really want to thank you for your candor.
Yeah, let me give you just one.
Thanks so much.
I'll just tell you one thing. If you don't like what you see, you got to vote, because somebody in this room's not voting, and you're being taken for granted, and you got to show up at the primary, and you got to register to a party, and if you want to, and if there was ever a time in our history when you shouldn't be afraid, it's now. You need to speak your piece, do it thoughtfully, do it the way you would like to hear it. Be that person you want to see out there objecting or in favor of. That's not my point, but your democracy in this time is up for grabs. And things do happen. We've been around for over 200 years, but there's no guarantee for tomorrow if all we do is sit on our hands and watch what we see happen continue. And I want to give the media some credit because they finally decided that they know who they are and they're objecting publicly. They haven't always. And people go to the news now to have their side of the story told to them, to be parroted back to. That's not the news. That's not fact-finding. And you see it everywhere. I mean, Fox News has their, CNN. That's not the way we're going to keep our democracy healthy. And of all the values that I've learned in my life, I think the one that's most important to me is tolerance. That I accept the notion that I don't like what you do, but I also accept the notion that you may not like what I do. And therefore, tolerance is a gift we give each other. And there's just not enough of that in Congress today. Enough people go there, the Christian right, God bless them, you know, they want to rebuild their image. Michael Pence is a dangerous man on social issues. And and he's a smart guy. But that's not who we are. Religious freedom, as Ronald Reagan Jr. says, it means religious freedom from, as well as to practice your own. And that's kind of a great standard, isn't it? Is to live within the law, but be tolerant. So thanks again.
Thanks so much.